Welcome back to the Howie Carr Show, everybody. This is Steve Robinson, Howie's executive producer, filling in for him as he slaves away on Kennedy Babylon Volume 2, which will be available shortly. And joining us now, as she does most every Monday, is celebrated author Ann Coulter. And Ann, I have your new book in studio, Resistance is Futile. I'm holding it up for the cameras. Looks like a very good book, and I'm looking forward to taking a copy of it on my honeymoon to read while I'm far away from the American news cycle.
Your honeymoon? When are you going on your honeymoon? I hope it's soon. You got to get to that book.
Yeah, no, I'm getting married on Saturday, actually.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ann. I appreciate that. Now, I got to ask you a question about a story that I think is a little bit more important than the the disposition of the flag on top of the White House, and that is the new developments that we're learning about this terror compound in New Mexico, where you had a collection of terrorists living out in a compound that could have come straight out of Mogadishu with rubber tires stacked up around circles and tunnels going every which way. We now learned in court filings that they were actually planning a terror attack on a hospital in Atlanta. And, I saw the story that you tweeted out where CNN wants us to think that the story is not, hey, there's a terror cell operating out of New Mexico and they had concrete plans to engage in terrorist attacks, and how many others are there that could be out there. CNN wants us to believe that the real story here is about how these terrorists struggled. It was tough.
How cool it is.
It was a hard knock life.
The grid.
Yes, it was a hard knock life that they lived out there. Torturing their children. One of them who ended up dying, all in the pursuit of some terrorist attack on a hospital and potentially some school shootings. I mean, this is unbelievable reporting.
It is. I mean, school shootings are pretty big news, and to have a group of people training children to engage in school shootings. It's almost like how you would parody the media. Oh, but you have to know they were illegal immigrants and Muslims, so we can't report that.
They're oppressed. They're oppressed,
and
they're
found on the compound.
They're historically marginalized communities, I believe is the phraseology.
Not historically in this country, because we didn't have them in this country, so perhaps they should go back to their own countries to complain about any marginalization. As I have said repeatedly, I'm not interested in hearing about affirmative action or special treatment, special pleading, diversity slots for anyone except descendants of African slaves. African Americans are what we have all of these rules for. You can't arrive yesterday and then say, I'm oppressed. Yeah, okay, you're oppressed, but not by us.
I think
go address the perpetrators.
I guess the whole idea of racial oppression kind of brings us to the issue that I know you've been tweeting out and speaking about in South Africa, and it's kind of come to the fore of the American media because the president tweeted out about it, and that is the forcible land seizure of the land owned by white farmers in South Africa. And I guess my understanding is this initially started out as a voluntary thing where the government would buy the land and then redistribute it to the victims of apartheid. And now because the president of the United States is standing up for property rights, which is one of the foundational values of American democracy, because he's standing up for property rights, this is somehow racist, and this is a white supremacist dog whistle. I don't understand this. Can you fill me in on why it's a problem for the president of the United States to stand up for property rights, even though it's in South Africa?
Well, I think it's more than that. It's the only genuine genocide going on in the moment any place on the globe. I mean, we're always being told we have to rescue, this group, that group from a genocide. In general, as in the Balkans, you just have warring tribes of some sense, and we have to rush in to take the loser's side in a bar fight. But they'll just go back and forth to fighting one another. That isn't what's happening here. The other important fact about what's going on is the Boers were in South Africa before the Zulus were, before the ones, the American liberals are such idiots. They just think, they're just like Native American Indians, and the white oppressors came in. No, the white farmers were there first. And then the Zulus came from the north, wiped out any tribes that were existing there. You are looking at a genuine genocide here, and it's not both sides. You don't have the Boer farmers going out and slaughtering Zulus. They're farming. They're feeding the Zulus. So it's a very serious matter, and I salute President Trump for tweeting something about it. That's when it occurred to me that although it often seems that Trump doesn't realize he is president and the powers he has as the president, he's been a fantastic communicator in this, not in the sense of being silver-tongued, but in saying the things that need to be said, from talking about the fake media, identifying the swamp, attacking people who need to be attacked, raising this about South Africa. And, maybe we just need Trump to come in as the destroyer of all the bad things so that, in a few years we can put in, who knows who it'll be, who knew Trump was going to come along. But, someone like Chris Kobach or Tom Cotton or David Perdue, there are a lot of terrific politicians out there, Stephen Miller maybe, the speechwriter, to actually get the stuff done that we want the president to be using the powers of the presidency to do. It would be great if we could just keep Trump on as the official tweeter and the one who gives the speeches for us, and then have somebody else who can run the country.
Well, I think from here on out, his Twitter profile is always going to be a canon for the things that he believes in and the things that he wants to criticize. But one last question on the issue of the South African farmers who are having their land seized. What do you think the left would be saying if Barack Obama did something like this? If he called attention to what is a genocide and the theft of people's property purely because they are white?
Or for any color, religious or ethnic group. No, you're right. He'd be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, though, as we know, he didn't actually have to do anything to be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize.
You just had to win an election.
Something higher than that, perhaps that would be what he would be nominated
the Mega
for.
Ultra Nobel Peace Prize, or maybe they'll just they'll just rename the Nobel Peace Prize the Barack Obama Prize instead. But the last thing that I want to talk with you about, Ann, is, we saw it happen a few weeks ago with Alex Jones, where there was this kind of, all at once, there was this movement to kind of deplatform he and InfoWars. Now we've seen that Robert Spencer, who's a prominent scholar who studies Islam and Islamic history, he has now been kind of deplatformed. They've taken away his Patreon.
Yes, I think that's because they're confusing his name with Richard Spencer.
Do you think it's that innocent? Do you think it's that innocent?
Scholar.
I know he's a fairly. I mean, obviously he is critical and he seeks to find the truth about the history of Muslims interacting in the West. But I don't think it's that simple. I don't think it's that simple that they're confusing him with Richard Spencer. And now I see that you've just tweeted out a story from Breitbart that you might be the victim of censorship on YouTube. I mean, where do you see this ultimately going with big tech? Because they're not our friends, and it might start with Alex Jones, but the left doesn't distinguish between Alex Jones and Ann Coulter and Howie Carr and Steve Robinson. For them, we're in just one big basket of deplorables, as Hillary Clinton would say. So, I mean, where do you see this going? And is there anything deplorables can do?
I'm particularly resentful right now about how they've moved from, I guess they realized calling everyone a racist was starting to produce howls of laughter. So now they just randomly assign the label white nationalist. I saw that done to, longtime financial writer, now the operator of an immigration website, Peter Brimelow, who's just so sophisticated, so brilliant. Does he call himself a white nationalist? Why, no, I don't think he does. But you just slap that label on him, or anyone. But the left may and the resistance may as well go around calling people poopy heads. It's all it is a slander of people.
But they're destroying the meaning of words.
I've never been on Alex Jones before. Of course, I've heard of him. Drudge has done him. Drudge is a fan of Alex Jones. Trump did it during the campaign. I will be on Alex Jones tomorrow at 12:30.
Oh, fantastic! You'll be on InfoWars tomorrow at 12:30. Well, great. Well, but it just seems like getting to your point about the white nationalist label and how it's being tossed around. Now that they moved on from racist or xenophobe, it just seems like they're destroying the meaning of words, and they don't understand how this is going to backfire on them. Because being called, having averaged everyday Americans who don't feel like they are racist and they're not racist, being called racist over and over again, that's how you got Trump. So it's going to continue to backfire on them.
Well, that's true, but I wouldn't just count on the backfiring. I mean, I do think action has to be taken. These are disturbing developments. Let me put it that way.
So what do we do, Ann? What do we do to fight the deplatforming?
Already has Washington, D.C., it's got the swamp, it's got the mainstream media, it's got Silicon Valley, they've got the universities, they have Hollywood, they have the public schools. The one tiny, tiny little area where you can get an alternative perspective is on the Internet. So now, it's just, that's it. We got to crack down on the Internet. We're just going to silence all these voices. I've worried about this for years. They'll just wake up one day and, hey, I can't get on Breitbart. What's going on here? I really do say that. I suppose they're smart. Don't let people hear any alternative perspectives. That's great. We'll just have the Chinese style brainwashing and no possibility of an alternative point of view. The laws can be changed, and I think these social media companies, they are the public square, and they should have the First Amendment applied to them.
Well, for the time being, Jeff Bezos is permitting your book, Resistance is Futile, to be sold on Amazon.com, and it is out now. I'm holding up a copy of it for the Newsmax cameras. Ann Coulter, thank you very much for being with us here on the Howie Carr Show.
Thank you. Good to talk to you, Steve. Bye-bye.
South Africa has been in the news a lot lately, but not in a good way. There's the pending extinction of the white rhinoceros and South Africa as the rape capital of the world, fistfights in Parliament, rampant AIDS, and sometimes, not nearly often enough, there is reporting of black-on-white crime so intense as to be a sort of slow-motion genocide. Almost never mentioned is the fact that this crime wave is actively encouraged by racist, anti-white elements in parts of the South African government. Now, if you're thinking that those evil white people are just getting what they deserve, here's a little history. The Afrikaners established the Cape Colony in 1652. The only inhabitants of the area were a few nomadic bands roving the countryside. The black tribes now saying the land belongs to them weren't there. Whites first encountered them up around the Fish River, some 1,200 miles from the Cape Colony, about 120 years after the colony was founded. With that out of the way, let's move on. I've traveled Africa from top to bottom. I've hitchhiked across the Sahara, and I know southern Africa pretty well. All my travel was up close and personal, occasionally riding in comfortable buses, but more often hitching rides in cars, in the backs of trucks packed with locals, or whatever was available. And I did a lot of just plain walking, alone and unmolested. Most of the black Africans I met, especially those in the bush, were helpful, friendly, curious people among whom I never felt threatened, despite my constant awareness that I was in some pretty dicey areas, including the Angolan border. Unfortunately, as we shall see, the whole dynamic can change in certain places at certain times. In 1993, the year before Mandela was elected president, I spent several months in South Africa. I had two main reasons for being there. One was to get into Angola to interview Jonas Savimbi, a key player in that country's civil war, and maybe lend a hand if that seemed appropriate. That didn't work out. But my second reason for being in South Africa was very successful. I was able to witness the political drama leading up to the fatal election of 1994. Many white South Africans, with the fall of Rhodesia fresh in their minds, were predicting war if the African National Congress came to power. In this tense atmosphere, I managed to meet many of the main white leaders and help out their cause where I could. Even then, in 1993, the sense of threat against whites was so thick you could cut it with a panga. For example, while I was there, a white man got drunk and wandered into a black township outside of Johannesburg, where the locals cut off his testicles and used them to make muti, our traditional African medicine. The crime rate against whites was high. All the white-owned houses I visited in both rural and urban areas had iron bars on the doors and windows, and razor wire topping the fences around them. Much of the threat was from ordinary criminals, but not all of it. In areas bordering the autonomous tribal lands, farmers were murdered and their houses burned by terrorists of the Azanian People's Liberation Army. These black guerrilla bands came across the border in the dark of night, hit their targets, and scurried back across the border. I visited a man in one of these border areas, a charismatic, good-humored farmer named Eddie, who trained local youth in military skills to protect against such raids. We spent a day in the bush as he instructed them in shooting, moving, and communicating across the terrain. Eddie and a few of us piled into Land Rovers and drove her to what was left of a homestead just over the hill that had recently been burned out. We all carried automatic rifles for protection, including his blonde teenage daughter. Why the caution? The motto of the Azanian People's Liberation Army, or APLA, was "One settler, one bullet." And their commander, Sabelo Fama, had declared that he would aim his guns at children to hurt whites where it hurt the most. Now, you may think all of this is old news, but it isn't. It's ongoing news. My point is that organized groups of South African blacks killing white civilians goes all the way back to the 1990s and earlier. What we are witnessing today is not a new thing, but only a variation on an old thing.
I was shot 2 times here, and once here in the neck, and it went outside my head.
In South Africa, the past is the present. Incredibly, these APLA fighters were integrated into the new South African Army after Mandela came to power, as were the guerrilla forces of the African National Congress, well known for their skills as torturers. Maybe that helps explain governmental involvement in anti-white terrorist attacks today. Returning to the current situation, there's strong evidence that some of the police are actively aiding home invaders. A member of the South African Police Service told investigative reporter Katie Hopkins, under conditions of anonymity, that, quote, "We have arrested serving members of the police during house robberies. Police weapons have been used in the attacks, not just personal weapons issued to every officer, but rifles that had to be signed out from the station. We know police ammunition has been used in farm attacks." Unquote. If you think this is a fantasy, consider this photograph, caught by a CCTV camera during one farm raid. The contraption on the farm invader's back is a Chinese-built device that goes by the nomenclature of a JAM 501. It was originally designed to keep terrorists from using cell phones for detonating improvised explosive devices. In this case, it is being used to keep besieged white farmers from calling for help. Now, if you think some random criminal is going to get his hands on one of these, think again. They're expensive military hardware and not easy to get a hold of. These criminals have government support. So, what is the end game for these atrocities? The plan is ultimately to purge South Africa of whites. This is consistent with what's happening inside the South African Parliament, which recently voted to confiscate white-owned land without compensation, and where Julius Malema, right-hand man of the current president, remarked a few weeks ago that, quote, "We're not calling for the slaughter of whites yet," unquote.
We are not calling for the slaughtering of white people, at least for now.
The bottom line is, whites are being genocided in South Africa, and all the denials from the left are simply because they cannot bring themselves to admit that noble blacks anywhere in the world are victimizing white people. Or maybe they just don't think that white men, women, and children are worth saving. Okay, enough about the problem. What I've said so far is not meant to depress you, it's meant to motivate you. What can you, as an individual living thousands of miles away from the literal scene of the crime, do to help white South Africans. There are a number of organizations making a difference. Here are 3 for which I can personally vouch. You can find them on Facebook and on their respective websites. Sadelanders is a group that believes civil war will come soon, and they may well be right. Sadelanders is a civil defense organization, not a paramilitary outfit, designed to peacefully evacuate white South Africans to protected areas where they can survive a crisis with relative safety. It is compliant with international laws governing civil defense organizations. I met 2 of their representatives, and they are rock solid. Another group, called simply South Africa Project, is an informational outlet informing people about the situation in South Africa. You're not likely to find this kind of coverage anywhere else. Their site will provide ample fuel for your propaganda efforts. The founder of this group is a South African who helped me immensely on my trip to that country, and I recommend her without reservation. She also heads the Living Waters Foundation, which focuses on action rather than information. Their first priority is providing food, clothing, and lodging for orphaned white children, and secondly, to help protect and support white farmers. Spread the word about the plight of white South Africans. The more people we inform, the more support there will be on all fronts, and the harder it will be for the anti-white forces in that country to get away with their evil deeds. Don't say you can't do anything about this, because you can. We're all Boers now. Thank you for watching this episode of Wolf Age. Contact me at wolfagemedia@gmail.com to inquire about signed copies of my book, Ausatru, A Native European Spirituality, or to purchase one of our Wotan mit uns t-shirts.
Dutch East India Company established its first outpost at Cape Town, South Africa in 1652. Dutch settlers began arriving shortly thereafter. As the number of Europeans, particularly women, in the Cape swelled, South African whites closed ranks as a community and chose to live apart, which is where the term apartheid comes from. In 1685, they were joined by French Huguenots fleeing religious persecution, many of whom became farmers, establishing a thriving agricultural civilization.
Now we can move to color blindness and always look at the man by the content of his character, never the color of his skin. I'm down for that. You get my vote. Yay and amen. I'm for that. But before we get there, we need to hear some truth. Black people had Africa, that big old continent over there. They never built one boat that was seaworthy. Not one. There's not one monument in Africa, in all of Africa. I know you're talking about Egypt. Egypt is not Africa. There are no great cities that were built. Even before the first colonization of white people coming to the shores of Africa or the slave ships, black men built nothing. No sewer system, no houses above one level, and none of them made out of stone, all of them made out of grass and wood. Black men, before the white man ever got to Africa. The worst thing that could ever happen to South Africa was when they gave it to Nelson Mandela and black folk. That was a great nation. Now, notwithstanding apartheid was wrong, we all know it's wrong. I'm against it. There should have been some other resolution, though, than turning it over to Nelson Mandela. Disease, AIDS, and crime is running wild in Johannesburg. They're killing one another over there. They're dying of sickness. The government is mismanaged. The people who ran the nation are now leaving the nation because black folk don't know how to run no nation. They don't know how, and we need to admit it. I know you don't like it, but you need to stop shucking and jiving. We got a problem. Nigeria produces oil every year, yet the children over there are hungry and pot-bellied and walking barefoot. We got a problem. You talk about the Hutus and the Tutsis. Look what's going on in Zimbabwe now with Mugabe. We got a problem, black folk. And forget about Zimbabwe and South Africa, Nigeria. Look at what y'all have done in Harlem. The most the black people have ever done, they did it here in America under white people's help. When they were in Africa, they didn't do nothing. You can get mad with me all you want. You can say what you, but you can't prove me wrong. Now, I'm not saying this because I hate black folk. I'm saying it because I love you enough to tell the truth.
During the latter part of the 20th century, segregation in South Africa was seen as racist and socially unacceptable, and with political pressure from other nations and globalist forces around the world, came to an end in the 1990s, giving rise to Afrocentric communism. The difference between regular communism and Afrocentric communism is that in South Africa, which now leads the world in interracial rape, crime, and murder, now legally justifies the government confiscation of farmlands from whites and turns a blind eye or even promotes the wholesale slaughter of its white population. Of course, the vast majority of black South Africans today are recent arrivals from areas to the north, which makes the idea that these lands were somehow stolen from them sound more like an excuse to carry out what most white South Africans describe as an ethnic genocide, ignored by the corrupt globalist-controlled medias around the world.
Controversial land reforms in South Africa are raising tensions as the nation's white minority arms themselves to defend their farms against government seizures. One America's Christian Rhodes has a story.
White South Africans are arming themselves to defend their properties in the wake of the land reform advanced by the black majority government of African National Congress, or ANC. This comes amidst a tidal wave of farm murders aimed against white landowners in the Rainbow Nation, and Afrikaners claim the government's inaction on violent crime and the planned expropriations fall in line with the ANC's far-left policies of white genocide.
When you leave home, you can feel the animosity. It's like if you walk down a street, you can feel it's like your skin color depicts who you are, not your soul.
This comes as the ANC is seeking to seize Afrikaner properties in both rural and urban areas. Most recently, ANC leaders, including South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, reaffirmed their commitments to the land and property expropriations at a so-called land summit in Boksburg, Gauteng. The upcoming reform is simple. If you are white in South Africa and you own land, a farm or a city home, the government will take it away with no compensation for the sake of greater social justice. Meantime, South Africa's streets are mired in violent clashes between the police and the country's black majority, who demand the land expropriation reform advance faster. Left-wing radicals claim European settlers stole their land hundreds of years ago, despite back in the 17th century South Africa was a sparsely populated desert, whilst the Rainbow Nation's black majority formed as a result of mass migration from tropical Africa in the late 19th century. 24% of South African land is owned by the government, while an additional 34.5% of South African land is owned by black people. This renders the ANC's claims of 70 to 80% white land ownership invalid, and also disproves the claims the black majority is lacking agricultural lands, as up to 70% of land claims currently filed with the government pertain to land in urban areas. According to a land bank study, more than 90% of farms redistributed since the fall of apartheid in 1994 failed and turned into squatter camps or subsistence farms. Rampant economic mismanagement and mass migration are challenging an ever-increasing number of people to leave their country or die fighting against the regimes of corruption, legal thievery and political repression. This process, unfortunately, is becoming universal and has reached far beyond South Africa, including countries such as Sweden, France and Russia.
Either we stay here or we immigrate. That's the only two options we are left with.
So you think your choices, are to leave the country or perhaps literally to stay and fight?
Yes.
Kill or be killed?
Yes.
The looming escalation of violence in South Africa is bringing the Rainbow Nation closer to a full-scale civil war over the nation's economic demise of the past 20 years, which has been racialized and politicized by the far-left ANC leadership. This, however, doesn't mean the farm murders and attempts to dispossess Afrikaners of their property will remain unanswered, as the number of Afrikaner commando training camps is growing exponentially in the face of the ANC tyranny.
You can't leave this place, really. Sorry.
In a tweet, Trump asked Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to keep a close watch on what he says are land and farm seizures, expropriations, and the large-scale killing of farmers. Trump went on to accuse the South African government of seizing land from white farmers.
The expropriation of land without compensation, our position is that that would risk sending South Africa down the wrong path. We continue to encourage a peaceful and transparent public debate about what we consider to be a very important issue, and the South Africans certainly do as well.
My name is Robert SEPEHR. Thank you for sharing. Please leave a comment, be safe, and I will see you next time.